Imagine boarding a train in your own country, only to discover that reaching another city in the same nation means crossing the borders of two completely different countries. It sounds impossible, but for hundreds of thousands of Russians, that's simply part of everyday life. On the shores of the Baltic Sea lies a small piece of Russia, separated from the rest of the country by Poland and Lithuania. It isn't connected by land. It isn't an island, yet it has remained part of Russia for decades. At first glance, it almost looks like someone accidentally placed it in the wrong location on the map. But this isn't a mistake. It's one of Europe's most fascinating historical puzzles. This region is called Kaliningrad. Although it covers only a small area compared to the rest of Russia, it is home to hundreds of thousands of people, bustling neighborhoods, ports, universities, and businesses. Russian is the language spoken here. Russian laws apply here. Russian flags fly above government buildings. Yet, every road leading to mainland Russia passes through foreign territory. Few places on earth challenge our understanding of borders quite like Kaliningrad. So, how did this happen? How did a small piece of Russia end up surrounded by Europe? Was it always Russian? Or did centuries of wars, empires, and political decisions slowly create one of the strangest borders in the modern world? To answer those questions, we need to travel back to a time when this land had a completely different name. A time when nobody living there could have imagined that it would one day become Russia. Long before this land became Kaliningrad, it was known as Königsberg. For centuries, it was one of the most important cities in a region called East Prussia, a historic part of the German-speaking world. Standing on the shores of the Baltic Sea, Königsberg was a thriving port where merchants, sailors, and travelers arrived from across Europe. Goods flowed through its busy harbor, ideas spread through its streets, and its location made it an important gateway between East and West. At the time, there was nothing unusual about the city. Nobody could have imagined that one day it would become part of Russia. Königsberg was known for more than trade. It was also a center of learning and culture. One of its most famous residents was the philosopher Immanuel Kant, whose ideas influenced generations of thinkers around the world. The city's university attracted students from across Europe, while its churches, markets, and stone streets reflected centuries of German history. For hundreds of years, life in Königsberg followed a familiar rhythm, and few people imagined that the city would one day become the center of an international mystery. But Europe was changing. Rivalries between powerful nations were growing. New alliances were forming. Tensions that had been building for decades were pushing the continent toward one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. When the Second World War finally erupted, Königsberg would find itself caught in a storm that would change its future forever. The city's German identity was about to disappear, and a completely new chapter in its history was about to begin. In 1939, Europe was once again pulled into a devastating war. What began as a conflict between nations quickly spread across the continent, leaving cities in ruins and millions of lives forever changed. As the war intensified, Königsberg's strategic position made it an important military center for Nazi Germany. For years, the city remained far from the front lines. But that wouldn't last. As the Soviet army advanced westward, Königsberg found itself directly in the path of one of the final and most destructive campaigns of the war. By 1945, the city was surrounded. Weeks of fierce fighting and relentless bombardment left much of Königsberg devastated. Buildings that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble. Thousands of civilians fled, while many who remained faced an uncertain future. When the fighting finally ended, Germany had been defeated. But for Königsberg, the end of the war marked the beginning of an entirely different story. After the war, the victorious Allied powers met to decide the future of Europe. Borders were redrawn. Entire regions changed hands. During these negotiations, the northern part of East Prussia, including Königsberg, was placed under Soviet control. It was a decision that would permanently change the political map of Europe. A city that had been German for centuries was now beginning a completely new chapter under Soviet rule. And soon, even its name would disappear. When the war ended, the Soviet Union wasted little time reshaping the future of Königsberg. In 1946, the city was officially renamed Kaliningrad, after Mikhail Kalinin, a prominent Soviet political leader. The new name symbolized far more than a simple change on a map. It marked the beginning of a completely new identity. Streets were renamed, government institutions were reorganized. The city that had been German for centuries was now being transformed into a Soviet city. The transformation wasn't limited to the city's name. Much of the German population had fled during the war or was later expelled. To rebuild the region, thousands of families from different parts of the Soviet Union moved into Kaliningrad. They arrived to empty neighborhoods, damaged buildings, and the enormous task of creating a new life. Over time, schools reopened, factories began operating again, and new communities emerged. Slowly, Kaliningrad grew into a distinctly Russian city, even though its streets still carried traces of a much older past. Kaliningrad's location also made it one of the Soviet Union's most valuable military positions. Sitting on the Baltic Sea, it gave the Soviet Navy direct access to European waters throughout the year. During the Cold War, the region became a heavily fortified military zone, largely closed to foreign visitors. While much of Europe was divided by political tensions, Kaliningrad quietly became one of the Soviet Union's most important outposts in the West. But history wasn't finished rewriting the map. Just a few decades later, another dramatic event would leave Kaliningrad isolated from the country it belonged to. For more than 4 decades, Kaliningrad was firmly connected to the Soviet Union. Traveling to the rest of the country was simple because every neighboring republic belonged to the same nation. But in 1991, everything changed. The Soviet Union collapsed. 15 independent countries emerged almost overnight, creating new borders where none had existed before. Nations like Lithuania, Latvia, and Belarus became independent states. Without moving a single kilometer, Kaliningrad suddenly found itself separated from mainland Russia by foreign countries. Overnight, Kaliningrad became what geographers call an exclave, a part of one country that is physically separated from the rest of it by the territory of other nations. Every road, railway, or journey by land to mainland Russia now required crossing international borders. What had once been an ordinary journey suddenly involved passports, customs checks, and international agreements. For the people living in Kaliningrad, geography had changed their daily lives without them ever leaving home. Despite its isolation, Kaliningrad did not lose its connection to Russia. Ships continued crossing the Baltic Sea. Air routes linked the region with Russian cities. Trade adapted. Families adjusted. Life moved forward. Today, Kaliningrad is a modern Russian region with universities, industries, cultural landmarks, and hundreds of thousands of residents. Yet, its unusual location continues to make it one of the most strategically important places in Europe. And that's why the world still pays close attention to this small stretch of land on the Baltic coast. At first glance, Kaliningrad might seem like nothing more than a small piece of land separated from the rest of Russia. But in reality, it has become one of the most strategically important regions on the Baltic Sea. Its location places it between Poland and Lithuania, both members of NATO, making Kaliningrad a region that attracts attention far beyond its size. What appears to be a simple border on a map has become an important part of Europe's modern geopolitical landscape. Kaliningrad is home to one of Russia's most important Baltic ports. Unlike many northern ports that can be affected by harsh winter conditions, Kaliningrad provides Russia with reliable access to the Baltic Sea throughout the year. The region also supports trade, transportation, fishing, education, tourism, and everyday life for its residents. While military importance often dominates the headlines, Kaliningrad is also a living city where hundreds of thousands of people work, study, raise families, and build their future. Kaliningrad reminds us that borders are not always permanent. They are shaped by history, diplomacy, conflict, and the choices of generations before us. Without moving an inch, this land has been Prussian, German, Soviet, and now Russian. Its story shows that behind every unusual border lies a much deeper human story. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson Kaliningrad has to offer. Sometimes, the smallest places on a map tell the biggest stories. At the beginning of this journey, we asked a simple question. Why is there a tiny piece of Russia surrounded by Europe? The answer wasn't hidden in a single decision or a single war. It was written over centuries. It was shaped by kingdoms, transformed by empires, rewritten by World War II, and forever altered by the collapse of the Soviet Union. Without ever moving, this small stretch of land witnessed some of the greatest turning points in European history. Today, when you look at a map of Europe, Kaliningrad no longer seems like a mistake. Instead, it stands as a reminder that borders are living records of history. Every line on a map represents decisions, conflicts, negotiations, and generations of people whose lives were shaped by events far beyond their control. Sometimes, understanding the world isn't about looking at where a country is. It's about understanding how it came to be there. And perhaps that's the most fascinating part of all. A territory smaller than many cities has carried the weight of centuries of history. It reminds us that the world's greatest stories aren't always found in its largest countries or its highest mountains. Sometimes they're hidden inside a small piece of land that most people never notice. Here at Beyond Borders by Sama, that's exactly what we're searching for. those overlooked places, forgotten stories, and surprising connections that help us see our world differently. Because every border has a story, and this was one of them. Thank you for watching.